In a small town in France, a crowd is slowly walking out of the cemetery. It turns out all these people used to be dead until now. The locals watch them in shock, not understanding what's happening. The crowd never continues to grow larger by the second, so the town council arranges a meeting to discuss the situation. The mayor reveals that dead people are coming back to life in every country, yet nobody has found an explanation for this phenomenon. It's been estimated that 70 million people have been revived around the whole world. In this little town, the resurrections lasted for a little over 2 hours, ending with almost 13,000 returned that are now wandering through the streets. By checking the cemetery register, the council learns that the revived crowd is formed by people who died in the past 10 years. There are both men and women and people of all ages, but more than 65% of them are over 60 years old. The only thing they all have in common is their health. Their bodies are in a perfect state and any pre-death sickness is gone. To keep such a huge crowd off the streets, the mayor decides to transform the local community center and the warehouses into shelters for the returned. It is important to keep them together in one place so they can identify them and send them back to their families. Since they are in perfect health, they're normal citizens again with all the corresponding rights. The council theorizes this whole process will take from 3 to 6 months to finish. The police and the army immediately begin getting the facilities ready for all the returned, who will arrange by gender and age. They must follow the UN's guidelines, which are very similar to refugee assistance. One of the revived is quickly recognized as the mayor's wife Martha. However, when someone tries taking her to the mayor, he refuses to see her and sends her home. Soldiers gather all the returned in buses to take them to the facilities. They must constantly stop them from wandering away and get them back in line. Council member Isham and his wife Veronique soon come to a shelter looking for their 6-year-old son Sylvain, who died a few years ago. They notice that the returned are being tested and interviewed, yet they don't share any kind of emotion. It seems they are always staring into the distance in silence and only speak if someone talks to them first. There's a mother who is presented with her revived baby and the shock leaves her frozen, so a nurse tells her she can take the kid home now or leave him in there until she's ready. Isham and Veronique show a picture of their son to a soldier. When he finally brings Sylvain over, the couple is shocked to see he hasn't aged a day. They're also told he can stay here until they're ready and visit him as often as they want. Later at the mayor's house, he finally reunites with his wife. Martha welcomes him home and comments on little things like him being late or looking tired. She even touches his face, acting as if she never left. Meanwhile, Rachel keeps avoiding the facilities and is creeped out by the return she sees on the streets. At home, she keeps wondering how to deal with this situation. Her husband Matthew died in a car crash 2 years ago, however she's already grieved him and moved on. Bringing him into her life again could possibly feel like she was regressing. At the shelter dorms, Matthew won't go to sleep and the nurses have to remind him to do so. Sometime later at work, Isham points out Rachel has been avoiding him, but she just makes up a bunch of excuses while feeling uncomfortable by a return working at the cafeteria. Isham shares details about his time visiting Sylvain and how happy he is to see him play again as if he was never dead. He also asks Rachel about her husband, but she quickly changes the subject. A few days later, the town council holds a new meeting to discuss the issues that are arising because of the returned. They're facing a potential housing problem, not to mention unemployment. Even if they could find positions for all of them, the returned are slow and don't communicate well, so there's no guarantee they could keep that job in the first place. The way the returned function is quite peculiar since sometimes they suffer from effects similar to the symptoms of a concussion, like disorientation and sleep disturbance. However, their motor functions work just fine. All these symptoms come and go, almost as if they were in a latent period. The doctors have also noticed that getting a job allows the state of the returned to progress and get healthier, so even if the reintegration project is putting a toll on the council's budget, canceling it would bring worse consequences. In the meantime, Matthew is working as an architect again, but the issues soon appear as the council predicted. He is very slow, lethargic, and only speaks when someone else talks to him first. During meetings, his slow speech makes it hard for the others to know when he's done talking. Although Matthew is already part of the town life thanks to his job, Rachel hasn't tried to contact him yet and he sometimes watches her through the window. One afternoon, Rachel sees Sylvain standing in a bush while staring at nothing, which creeps her out. Veronique quickly arrives to retrieve her son and sends him back to playing with other kids in the park. While Veronique watches him, Isham arrives and mentions they should bring Sylvain to live with them already. However, Veronique feels uncomfortable and announces she's going home, saying she's tired as an excuse. Isham brings their dog to play with Sylvain and notices how the animal would bark at the elderly returned. Sometime later, the council discusses a new issue. The elderly returned wander off a lot and it's hard to keep them in the facilities or in their homes, no matter if it's night or day. They're not very aware of their surroundings, so a simple walk is dangerous for them. Since they are retired, they don't work either. Experts theorize they may be looking for a familiar place, or it could just be a response caused by the trauma of dying. Studies show that these particular returned are full of energy and are very resistant to infection, probably because their body temperature is lower than a regular human's. To deal with this, Dr. Gardet develops a medicine that helps them sleep better at night and move less during the day. This product is quickly licensed and marketed so every family can access it. Gardet also makes tranquilizer darts with this medicine for the soldiers, explaining it works as mid-sedative only on the returned. A normal human would sleep for 2 days and wake up sick, taking days to recover, so they need to be careful about who they shoot. One night while watching the return, the soldier tells Gardet that some of them are only pretending to sleep. Suddenly Gardet notices Matthew dressing up and leaving the facility. The soldier explains that Matthew does that every night and that he's just going to work. Finding this strange, Gardet decides to follow Matthew. At the office, Gardet is surprised to find a group of returned having a meeting and chatting normally. The security guard tells him they do this every night. Sometime later Rachel is going home after work and notices Matthew following her. She doesn't dare to say anything and neither does Matthew, so they start heading home together in silence. Gardet follows them in secret because he's been studying Matthew's behavior. At home Rachel still feels uncomfortable by her husband's presence, so she immediately hides in her room. Meanwhile the mayor throws a party to reintroduce Martha to the rest of the family. She's happy to see everyone but doesn't eat, claiming she's never hungry in the evenings. Suddenly she turns around as if she heard something and leaves to walk into the garden. Her caretaker reveals she spends her entire days walking around the yard with no purpose. The mayor follows Martha and tries to bring her back. However, she ignores him and just keeps going, only stopping to say hi to her granddaughter. That night, Rachel finally approaches Matthew and they manage to have a conversation. Eventually she gathers enough bravery to kiss him and they end up getting dirty in the living room, unaware that Gardet is watching them through the window. During the next meeting, the council discusses the return's low body temperature, which is causing them to appear as creepy white figures on thermal cameras. Since they're desperate to learn more about the mysterious meetings, they decide to attach a bunch of thermal cameras to balloons to follow the return's night activity. When the first report arrives, they discover that the return cover an average of 9 miles a day regardless of age or gender. The older people are slow, but they don't stop until they're done. The cameras also confirm that night meetings are happening all over town, but it's too early to recognize any patterns. While this is being explained, the mayor notices Rachel leave the room. As days pass, the elderly returned continue to wander off a lot. Rachel is feeling very comfortable with Matthew and is even happy to have him in her life again. She thinks she should stop going to the council meetings because the way they talk about the returned bothers her. Now that summer is here, Matthew hates the heat and is always eager to go swimming. Meanwhile, Veronique is watching her son play outside, not looking happy about having the boy live with them again. Suddenly an old returned appears and makes Sylvain's game move too fast, so Isham rushes to stop him. When he looks at his wife, she's hurrying back inside. One night, Rachel hears a noise and leaves the bed to investigate. She finds Gardet outside claiming he only wants to help her cope with the situation and that he knows how she feels. He wonders if she knows that Matthew sneaks out every night to go to the office, but Rachel says her husband only has trouble falling asleep and he's fine. After kicking Gardet out, Rachel returns to her room and finds Matthew awake. He asks if she was talking to someone, but she says she wasn't. Sometime later at work, Matthew's boss notices that his report makes no sense and tries to explain what's wrong, but Matthew doesn't understand him. This causes him to get demoted to the factory area where all the returned work. During the next council meeting, the doctors bring a big update. It turns out the returned semi-normal behavior isn't natural, they've just been imitating what normal humans do and doing things they remember from their previous life. This means they can't take on responsibilities and are only capable of learning very simple tasks if they're properly trained. They'll have to decide if the return must be taken out of society or if they can find a very specific niche for them. A few nights later, Matthew wakes up and leaves the house without Rachel noticing. Gardet follows him and this time he gets close enough to the night meeting. The returned are all talking at the same time, discussing routes to take while pointing at maps. At the same time, Sylvain has been banging on the front door for an hour, desperate to leave the apartment. Veronique eventually drags him away and tells Isham that they should consider the government's special education program for the returned kids since she believes Sylvain scares the normal kids. However, Isham doesn't trust the council. When Veronique tries to give Sylvain another dose of the sedative, Sylvain keeps turning his head away and an angry Isham stops her. Getting upset, Veronique says their son only wants to leave them and it's as if he never really came back. Meanwhile, Martha takes a chair to the garden and tries to use it to jump over the fence, but the mayor stops her just in time. The next day the mayor shares his situation with Rachel. He's worried that one morning he'll wake up and Martha will have disappeared. He admits he locked Martha up in the bedroom last night and that lately she scares him. Rachel refuses to talk and when the mayor asks her about Matthew, she walks away. Meanwhile at work, Matthew starts having flashbacks of the day of his death, remembering he left with the car after a fight with Rachel. Eventually Rachel goes to see Gardet, who shows her a video of Matthew's first interview. He seemed sharper than the others and answered the questions about his past perfectly, but spontaneous speech failed him. He also didn't understand that he'd been gone for 2 years. Rachel wants to know how to help her husband, however Gardet tells her she must come to terms with the fact Matthew will never be normal again. Upset and frustrated, Rachel storms out. When she gets home, she discovers Matthew is gone. At Isham's home, Sylvain looks out the window at an elderly man in the backyard. At the same time, the mayor wakes up when he hears Martha getting out of bed, but she convinces him to go back to sleep before she sneaks out of the house. Moments later at the park, a security guard notices the return gathering and tries to send them home, but they ignore him. Suddenly something blows up behind the guard. Soon explosions begin happening all over town, causing dangerous fires. Meanwhile, all the returned are leaving their homes and gathering at a tunnel. This is the plan they discussed during the meetings all along. Matthew stares at the return going down the tunnels and decides to go back. Soon the mayor finally notices his wife is missing and goes out in his car to look for her. He finds her leaving with other returned and immediately drags her into the car, but the others surround the vehicle to stop them from leaving. Martha asks him if he's tired and if he wants to go with them, so she advises him to let go. In just a second, the mayor dies and becomes a return too, so the couple joins the others hiding in the tunnel. A few hours later, the news announced that the explosions didn't hurt anyone and a curfew is now in force on the whole country. Nobody knows where the returned have gone and people are told not to go looking for them. Sylvain still wants to leave and Veronique thinks they should free him, but Isham refuses. Getting desperate, Sylvain ends up jumping. Isham cries as he sees the body on the ground, thinking his son is dead again. However, Sylvain is fine and walks off to join the other returned. Determined to fight back, the military prepares grenades filled with a particular chemical that can put the returned in an irreversible coma. Soon they find a group of returned trying to reach the tunnels and start gassing them, making them fall unconscious one by one, including Sylvain. Meanwhile, Matthew returns home and tells Rachel that the day after the fight, he left work early to talk to her and apologize. However, he didn't find her at home and went looking for her, driving so fast that he ended up in the crash that killed him. Overwhelmed with guilt, Rachel has a breakdown. The moment is interrupted by Gardet breaking into the apartment. Matthew hears him, so the couple escapes through the window. While hearing the gas explosions in the distance, Rachel follows Matthew into a tunnel. After wandering for a while, she cries as she kisses him goodbye. Matthew leaves and Rachel has to go home alone. On her way back, Rachel watches the soldiers take the unconscious returned back to the cemetery. Each body is left on top of their corresponding grave and they slowly disappear.